Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. My guest today, Craig Wolff, is a writer, a former reporter, and now a professor of journalism at NYU. And I've just finished reading a wonderful book he wrote with Amadou Diallo's mother, Kadiatou, called My Heart Will Cross This Ocean. It's a wonderful book. It's a lovely, it's a terrible story, but it's a lovely story also of her life and how she came about. So I'd like to talk about that. How did you meet her? How did this all happen?
You know, it happened in a very sort of routine business sort of way. Although I had met Amadou's father, he had actually come to speak at a couple of my classes. And I had invited him in. Why him and not her, I don't know.
Mistake.
But I got a phone call from my literary agent who said that Mrs. Diallo is looking for someone to help write her book. And would you be interested to meet her? I said, of course. And what's interesting about that is when I was introduced, my agent did the whole show-busy agent thing. He's the best this, the best that, he's the best reporter, he'll read the best researcher, he will read everything ever published about Amadou. And I turned to Mrs. Diallo and I said to her, that was all very nice, except I have to make one important correction. I don't plan on reading a single thing about Amadou. And she later told me that it was at that moment that she knew she wanted
that's nice.
Me to help her. And basically what happened, I think, at that moment is that our interests intersected. Her interest, of course, as the mother, who wanted to give a fuller picture of who...
I think we should just say, for people who may not know what we're talking about, that Amadou Diallo was the young man from Africa who was shot 42 times.
41.
41 times by the police in the Bronx.
The Soundview section, February 4th, 1999 now. And
it led to a whole question of...
He was approached by 4 plainclothes police officers who did not like something in his movements. And they, as I said, fired 41 times. He was struck 19 times. Although, as I detail in the book, because I want to be very precise about this, 16 of the bullets made exit wounds.
Went through.
So there were 35 holes in his body, including wounds on his feet and the bottoms of his feet.
Indicating he was already on the ground.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I went up there. I saw the vestibule. I mean, it wasn't...
it's nothing.
Very big at all, right?
Right.
Which
is interesting because you do get, with this kind of story and lots of others, you get a picture in your mind's eye about what it looks. And I had an image too, when I started the book, that you know, it was a vast space and they were far away from him and their view was obscured. But as you say, it was like a little elevator box, essentially.
It was up one step maybe, I think.
Couple of
2 steps. And there it was. And the street was a narrow street and there they were. And of course all the news stories talked about the street vendor from Africa.
Right. Which is
now tell us.
Yeah, which is exactly what made her more than bristle, and as the mom who didn't recognize her own son in that description, and I, as a writer and now as a teacher, who preaches and tries to live this idea that people should not be reduced to these sort of cardboard cutout caricatures. And what did Amadou Diallo become? The unarmed West African street vendor, right?
Absolutely.
You couldn't see his name without seeing that. What's more, he was the street vendor who was sending money home to his poor parents in the village. You could not read a word in all those accounts about the fact that he spoke 5 languages, that he was schooled in the finest French and English schools in Bangkok. Private schools, that his most formative years were not really in Africa, and that his father is a multi-millionaire, a wealthy man, international businessman. People have a hard time wrapping...
And his mother was a businesswoman.
And his mother, Kadiatou, as I discovered, and as the story details, was an established woman. Not to suggest, by the way, that his life, or the loss of his life, would have been less meaningful, but somehow I think in that tag, he becomes the faceless, nameless person who we don't have to think about too much, the street vendor. What's more, to call him an unarmed man, to me, is also a pernicious part of the label, even though it's technically right, because it suggests, in a sense, that his natural state is armed. I like to look at it this way. What was Amadou Diallo, say, 1 minute before the shooting? He wasn't the unarmed man then. So how did he become the unarmed man?
Yeah.
Not by virtue of anything he did. So it's a label that was sort of foisted upon him, and I think also serves to sort of distance him in a subtle kind of way. The tale.
Well, the story really goes back a generation to when she was really born and how she grew up, right?
Even past
Before
that. Yeah. I mean, as you know, the book begins with a young man walking through the forest.
Right, and it was her father.
It was Amadou's grandfather.
Grandfather, right.
Also named Amadou.
Yes.
You know, trying to get to the good school.
And how that's right, walked how far to go to school? It was a long, he really worked
so far
to go to
that he
school.
had to stay in the town. He couldn't come back.
Right.
And he had to overcome great fears walking through the forest and whatnot, and really with nothing on his back to sustain him. And but yeah, I mean, I think this is a place where people start out in the villages, to generalize. Then they want to. If they start out in the villages, they want to get to the town. And if they go to the town, they want to get to the city. And if they get to the city, the capital, in this case of Conakry, then they want to come here, specifically here, maybe Europe. In that sense, it's a very familiar story. It's not, you know, people say, well, if he came from this background, what was he doing selling on the street? And I said, why is that so hard to understand? Could you look at it akin to maybe your grandfather coming over?
That's right, all the peddlers downtown, right? The push carts.
Right. Or maybe even...
so interesting. That's such a good point,
or maybe like a college student, say, from New York, who he's graduated, wants to live in Europe, and
he goes and plays in the subways.
He's standing on 14th Street. He doesn't have any connotations of what it means, no negative connotations of what it means to be selling on the street. He's looking at the Empire State Building. He said, the United States, he's living a fantasy.
His father sort of started a business that way.
His father began his fortune selling on a roadside in Senegal.
And his mother baked cookies or candies and sold them, right?
Right, exactly right.
Yeah, so it's just a natural thing that's how you do it. You accumulate some money and then you move to the next step. What was interesting about her also is that she's a strong woman, not only a strong woman, but a feminist, and a very sensitive person, I think. She was deprived of the education she always wanted, right, by being forced into an early marriage.
Exactly.
With the husband who showed up, who really was her ex-husband. Were they ever divorced?
Well, they divorced by basically saying, I divorce you 3 times, and that's what divorced them. She was, just to detail that a little bit, she was given away for marriage when she was 13 by a father who was, in many respects, for his times and for his place, a modern thinking man who wanted his daughters to do great things and educate them. But when the eldest daughter becomes pregnant out of wedlock, he gets into this sort of Learian sort of rage and gives away his next 2 daughters for marriage. And then the eldest daughter did fairly well in the long run, right? And they all did. They all did very well and established careers. Kadi, as I call her, she was deprived of basic education, but she inherited some kind of smarts and will from her mother and her father. And you know, people have said to me, Ronnie, that when we did public appearances and readings, there were more than a few people who would look at me quite angrily. Why is that white man sitting next to you? Why is he writing helping you write your story? And not that it's an understandable question, but you know, this is a tale that she wanted to write, and by that I mean it's not a tale just about confrontation, but it's also a tale about a family, about how a family, she was terribly hurt by what her father did, and she loved him.
Yeah.
And I think we connected in another place that had nothing to do on some level with race. I'm not being naive about it when I say that, about the differences, but we connected about what it means to be in a family and all that stuff.
She seemed to me, I mean, when you talk to, she sold gems in Thailand, right? In Bangkok, she was in business and did a lot of business with a lot of different kinds of people. I didn't get a feeling about her feelings about race. I didn't think that they were very sharp, is what I meant. I think she saw people, and I may be wrong, but it didn't.
Well, but you know, I think you're absolutely right.
And certainly her husband was trading in business with anybody. So
this is, and of course this is something which really played into when she did come here.
That must have been the greatest sudden shock, right?
After the shooting, she would appear at these rallies, and many people carried with them the expectation that she was somehow an icon for all of their concerns and their anger. But let's just look at it quite bluntly. She is African, not African American. So while she knew certain things, she hadn't experienced them, did not share that pent-up feeling. Right. Now, there were lots of atrocities that she had to go through in Africa.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was not a...
It was a very dangerous time when she grew up, and they got stopped a lot, and the point when the husband was stopped by the police and almost got killed, except for Amadou's smile or something. Yeah.
She grew up, it was routine that they would walk by the football stadium, and there were bodies that would be hanging.
But she never wanted to go to see them. She said other people did.
Yes, but she knew that they were in there, and she saw people disappear from her street. So,
but the irony that she grew up with this tyranny and this force from the rebels and all the different terrible things, to come to the land where everybody's supposed to be free and then to have her son killed by the police must have been overwhelming, I think.
I think she came here as a grieving mom.
Yeah.
And as I say, at first, I think there was a lot of misunderstanding, even distrust about her. If you remember, there were a lot of articles written trying to parse her words and the relationship between her and her ex-husband.
Right. Nobody knew it was the ex-husband.
It was
in
an
the beginning,
ex-husband,
right?
and there was this sort of classic American media fascination with some of these sort of superficialities, and she was sort of struggling to understand what everyone was so angry about, but I think in time, because of her nature, which is, as you say, she's very strong, but she doesn't come at you hard in a way, but she knows what she wants to say, and she was very strong. When she came over, Mayor Giuliani at the time wanted to enlist her support and wanted to team up with her. And even through the grief, even through her quote-unquote ignorance of where she had landed, she was savvy enough at certain points to say, no, I'm not ready. I don't know what you're up to. This is a woman who had done business, was shrewd, and didn't suffer fools easily. So
in the book you say she walked off the plane expecting that maybe somebody would be there, but didn't know. And this crowd was there. The mayor was there. Sharpton was there. Everybody was there, and everybody was grabbing at her. And it was from then on, just like a political campaign of crowds, people wanting to either use her or support her. It was a very, but it seemed to me she became, because I saw her at different things then. I was in the city council. I even got arrested. But she she stood up straight. She had the greatest dignity, and I think now she still does, and she's living here in this country.
She is.
Yeah.
She's her 3 grown children are with her,
Yeah.
and her the sort of the epilogue, if you will, to the story is that her daughter Lara last year had triplets.
Oh.
3 boys, and one of them
is Amadou.
One of them is Amadou. So,
and she's a great feminist, also.
She's
Totally,
lived her life as a
Right.
feminist.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know, this is a woman she was wife number 2, and I mean,
Yeah.
at the same time, her husband,
Yeah.
and then her husband,
13 years old.
and her husband took a 3rd wife later
Yeah.
on. She decided to divorce while she was in Bangkok, away from all her brothers and sisters and mom and dad, all the support system, and
She stood up to her husband constantly. She was never intimidated.
She's
by
a true. I mean,
Yeah.
she's a true feminist because
Right.
she lived it. You know.
Right. I love the time. Where did she live when she spent the $30,000 and had a Mercedes and was buying nice clothes and had this friend? It was great.
Yeah, when she felt a little bit liberated, and her
Right.
husband had gone off
Yeah, and she
to open
lived
up
it up.
another business, I believe in Liberia. She had a grand old time.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny moments like that.
So I think people should really read it. It's really a lovely book. We're gonna. I want to push this because I wanted to ask you a few other things. And we're not even going to. You wrote a book about Tawana Brawley, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. So it's interesting, though, that Sharpton appears in both things because it was a whole thing. Have you ever followed him politically when you were reporting? He used to work for the Times.
Yeah, not really. You know, he has appeared when I was teaching at Columbia Journalism School. He would come at my invitation to give talks, and he would call it his annual Tawana Brawley debate with Craig Wolff, and still, if I had him, you know, speak tomorrow, I would still pose the question to him of how he could have allowed that thing to
get to the point it did.
Yeah.
He was duped at the beginning, wasn't he?
He was duped. I mean, boy, you're going back
No,
now. But,
we shouldn't even talk about it.
but I'll tell you this: he was duped in the sense that he allowed
story.
himself to be duped. Let's put it that way.
He believed her story.
He believed her story, but he never questioned the story, and that I think was his.
That's the big thing. So now you're teaching. And you're teaching this next generation of journalists. And at the same time, I mean, I understand circulation is down in newspapers, all questions about television reporting. What's it like to teach what do you think the future is going to be, and what's teaching journalism?
It is a very, very challenging time to be teaching young journalists because, let's face it, the media as a whole is on its heels and is feeling beleaguered and self-conscious, and so you have these young reporters who think that that's the way it's always been, that's the way it's almost supposed to be, that they are in some way outcasts, and that's a very bad place to be because and I talk about this at length in my classes. A reporter, when he knocks on that door, he or she has to understand, I think, fundamentally who they are. And who they are at their best is they're a wise priest. They're a guide. I had a student soon after September 11th, a former student, who called me up to say that she had been assigned to go interview the family of a young woman who had died at the Trade Center. And she could not bring herself to knock on the door. She said to me, I felt like a sniveling little skunk. And I think she called her old prof, wanting me to wag my finger at her and say, you get back to that door. And I said to her, because she didn't knock on the door. I said, I'm glad you didn't, because you're not ready. Now what I want you to do is to put your shoulders back and understand that what you're doing is really a sacred thing, that you're connecting up that family in New York with a family in Hong Kong, with a farmer in Idaho, and so on. We're living in a time where somehow we've lost a sense of how important that is. If we become more and more isolated from one another, separate from one another, which is what a lot of People in government now they'd like us to be that way. We become less equipped to understand what's going on in the world. We become less empathetic to the troubles of others. And I said to her, put your shoulders back, because when you say sniveling little skunk, it also it kind of makes, and go in there and say, I really want to write about not her death. Right. I want to write about her life. I want to know who she was. Now, if they then say, I'm sorry, you go, oh, I understand, and you leave.
Right. That's such a good way of putting it, because, you watch the television news and a child gets shot, and the first thing you see is, well, how do you feel now?
Oh, well, this is my pet thing, Ronnie.
Oh, what is that?
I know. This is my pet thing. The most overrated question in journalism is, how do you feel? The best question is, what do you do? Right. Or how does that work? Because if someone were writing about, say, my grandmother, what would I tell them about how? Would I say how I feel about her? Well, I adored her, but what does that really? No, I would tell you that you'd go into her apartment and it smelled like oranges. Why? Because she used to take orange peels and put them on the radiator. Oh. Now, in 2 seconds, you've learned something about. Well, we're living in times where somehow that art of writing is diminished. Even at journalism schools, they are moving away from emphasizing a teaching of this craft. They call it skills or content, that it's somehow we're more focused on how we're going to get the information to you. Is it going to come to you on a piece of paper, in a book, in a computer? These are all important questions, but fundamentally, there's still, if we lose the ability to write the story, but not just write it, but find the story. Right. And to be smart enough to know when you're having the story dictated to you.
Oh, that's that's what it's all about these days, isn't it? It's a handout, always. I mean, it's like a press release, not individuals, but certainly the government.
It's handouts, it's a sensibility. Yeah. Why was it right after we went into Iraq under this president, you would read stories in the New York Times about the president, there would be scenes as if the writer was right there, sitting at his desk, furrowed brow, and he said to so-and-so, where's that coming from? You know what? You don't see those stories anymore, because things become in fashion and out of fashion. Now, for whatever reasons, the tide has turned perhaps a little. It's not in fashion to sort of idealize him in that
That's
sense.
because of the polls. They follow the polls too.
Well, maybe so. Maybe so.
I mean, or they've gotten courage. What is it?
I
used to, I always grew up believing that I've said this so many times, I'm sure people get tired of it. It's the fourth estate. The press was supposed to be the protection for people. They were supposed to find out what was really happening. Is that wrong?
Do you know there was an op-ed column by David Brooks in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago that talked about the coverage of Cheney shooting his friend accidentally. And it absolutely a scathing article about how the press just always reacts in this knee-jerk reaction about following the trail. And I'm reading this, I'm saying, and this is a bad thing?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first purpose of a press. We're supposed to be prodding and poking. We're not supposed to be friends with anybody.
That's the downfall of everybody, isn't it? When you get to be too friendly with somebody.
Oh, absolutely. And to put it in some kind of context, the mainstream American press missed the Holocaust story.
Right.
There's lots of stories over time.
Isn't that amazing? Yes, it's true.
It's true. Now, how in the world could that be? How, I believe, yesterday I picked up the paper and I see 10 more people killed in Iraq, or 14 more people, and it's on page 10. Every day, that story of those killings of Iraqis, Americans alike, that needs to be a banner headline every day.
I've heard that before. I hear that every day in my household with my husband. Outraged, When he was still writing a column, he used to just list the dead for Newsday. He just would get the list from down at the Pentagon or wherever it was.
But
The only people who write...
Tell them I'm coming over.
All right, you have to come over anyway. But, the Army News was the paper that really has all this information. It's the only paper, it seemed to me, early into the Iraqi war that really was publishing some.
Do you remember when Giuliani first came into office, the very first thing he did was to cut the size of the media relations staff at the police headquarters. And people thought, all right, well, you had a lot of people there doing, desk jobs. What's the big deal? Isn't it interesting how very often, if not all the time, that the first thing that very controlling administrations want to do is to control the flow of information.
Right.
It's the first thing they want to do.
Right. You won't believe this, but we have 1 minute left. What are you doing now? You're writing another book. Do you miss not reporting regularly in a paper? Or writing in a paper?
No.
Okay.
Not really. My dad had an expression, most people are too busy, how does it go, making a living to make any money. And as a news reporter, you're too busy writing every day to do any writing. So I like this chance. I began as a sports writer, and I'm now writing a biography of Willie Mays.
That's a great story.
And which is also, a story that surprises you. And also, I want to lift him out of caricature as well.
And you're doing a lot of his background of where he was, where he grew up, and under what he.
I spent most of my time in Birmingham, Alabama, to work on this book.
So interesting. Well, I thank you so much, Craig Wolff. Is the T for Thomas Wolfe, and were you named for Thomas Wolfe?
I don't know if I was named for Thomas Wolfe, but it is Thomas.
Yes, I know that.
And I do give thought now and then to actually plopping it into the middle of the byline. But an editor once said to me, that'd be a little too much. So.
Well, thank you very much, and lots of luck with your new book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward